I do some consulting work on American
feeling in the room was
You
palpable.
don't ever say to her that her
One about the Chautauqua Institute.
Introductory discussion on the ethical
We
implications of a community.
before China took back over.
Currently doing in autism.
As head of Education and Human Resources Programs at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, Shirley Malcom is committed to finding and nurturing underrepresented talent in the sciences. Her drive is deeply personal. She is a former member of the National Science Board, the policymaking body of the National Science Foundation, and served on President Clinton's Committee of Advisors on Science and Technology. A Penn State alumnus, Malcom holds 16 honorary degrees. We'll talk with her about overcoming the deficits of her own segregated schooling and about her efforts to ensure women and minorities don't experience the same hardships in science that she did. Here's our conversation with Shirley Malcom. Shirley Malcom, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
You've dedicated much of your career to eliminating the obstacles that prevent minorities, especially women of color, from becoming scientists. And you had to overcome a few obstacles of your own. Tell us a bit of your own story.
Well, I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, and that's long enough ago that we had segregated schools, and they were not particularly well resourced. I think that there was the expectation that you're unlikely to get scientists or engineers out of these schools. And so that meant that they didn't bother to put all the chemicals that we needed in the chemistry labs or all the equipment that we might need in those labs. And so you can end up with deficiencies that you find later on when you are in a college chemistry course.
So here you are, first in your class in Birmingham, Alabama.
You
go to the University of Washington in Seattle.
That's right.
And suddenly you realize, I don't know what I need to know.
Well, I kind of knew that I was going to have problems even before I left Birmingham. You realize that you are disadvantaged by what did not get invested in you. And so you realize, too, that you're likely to need help. The issue, though, is how do you get that help? In my case, it happened that the person who was my teaching assistant was the only African-American graduate student in the chemistry department. And so I went to him and said, I'm not dumb, I'm underprepared, but I'm not dumb. And he got to the point where he did believe me and then reached out and helped me. I tell people, I say I got a 9 out of 20 on my first quiz. I got a 7 out of 20 on my second quiz. I realized this was not a good direction. But after his help, I got an 18 out of 20 on the next one, and he was happier than I was.
You convened in 1975 30 minority women of all races and backgrounds who were in the sciences to sort of look at what it was like, how they got there, how these women of science made it. And the result of that was the 1976 landmark report, The Double Bind, The Price for Being a Minority Woman in Science. One of the key things you talked about among this group was how, against all odds, did we 30 women make it? How and why? What was the answer to that?
Well, I was, just one of the staff people at the time, and my boss actually did the convening, and she sat down with me and said, well, what was it like? And I started to talk, and you began to hear the same stories over and over again, that you were like the strange person in the class, that you, in fact, made it in spite of, not because of. And I think that was kind of like the theme that ran through the entire part. But the other part was that because you are both minority and female, different barriers appear at different times. That early on, the barriers were largely related to the fact that you were a member of a minority group who might have been discriminated against, or part of a school culture, or in a school setting where minorities were not seen as the material to go on to science and engineering. And later on, when you go into a college setting, that you then had the fact that you were female. And you were
the double bind.
The double bind. You then had the fact that you were female that kicked in, and caused people to not see you as being a person who could go on in science. I mean, I had one student actually say to me, I was pre-med when I first started this, why do you want to go to medical school?
You had a student say that.
This is the student. Don't you realize you're just going to take a man's place?
Oh my.
And so you just kind of got used to it. I said to him, it's only his place if he earns it. You know, the kind of assumption that he was entitled and that I was not worthy.
The interesting thing, too, is that throughout this process, an underfunded high school background, then college at the University of Washington, later graduate school at UCLA, and a PhD in ecology from Penn State, you said it was actually, in some ways, the discrimination and discouragement, in some ways, because of being black and a woman, was greater the higher you advanced in your education.
Absolutely, because you were even more isolated and it's smaller in number. The further you went, the more isolated you became.
And not just isolated in terms of other professionals, but you said isolated in terms of peers, friends who were discouraging you from being different.
Well, I mean, the thing is that if you think about it, you are putting yourself into a very competitive, rigorous kind of a program. And oftentimes our families want us to be happy and secure, and you're
not struggle,
and you put yourself into the middle of a struggle. My uncle Jerry once said to me, "Is she still in school? Why doesn't she just come home and be a teacher like her mother and her aunts?" And because he saw, he didn't know what that meant. He didn't know what a PhD was, and he saw the struggle and the long period of time after I had graduated from college that I was still in school, and he didn't get that.
You've said that it's not enough to become a teacher, that women, minority women especially, need to take on, whether they want to or not, it seems, administrative roles so they have some input in the policy and the decision making.
I love teaching, and I happen to think that I was pretty good at it because I listened to my students. And I guess in some ways I would have stayed in that role. But at some point, if you do not take on the policy environment, you do not affect what happens to others who are within the similar situation that you came from. And it was different. It was different. I did not understand about policy. I had good mentors who helped me understand that somebody makes the rules, that I might as well be a part of that somebody. And so it was a very different kind of a role that you began to take on.
Today, you know, in the last two election cycles, I think it has been said, and I think fairly, that there are a number of major politicians who you might describe as anti-science. And so I have to ask, they're the ones making education policy. They brought us No Child Left Behind and today Common Core curriculum. And I'm wondering, from where you sit, an educator really concerned about these issues, how much do legislators really know about educating in the weeds on the ground?
I think that in many cases, not just legislators, but policymakers and thought leaders feel that because they have gone to school or they've had children in school, that
they know what they need to know.
Understand what they need to know. And while there may not be enough research on education that we need, as much as we need, there is research. And we need to check in on that research in terms of what we choose to advocate for. And I think that this is part of the difficulty that we have. How do we begin to inform decision making with evidence? And what is the process by which we can, in fact, affect the decisions that are made?
You talk a lot about promoting the STEM sciences, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. You talk about it from cradle to grave.
Yes.
And the reality is that 28% of high school freshmen are interested in STEM careers.
Right.
By the time they become seniors, half of them have lost the interest. And you say that we're very good at killing interest. What do we do?
We weed, we don't cultivate.
You might have been weeded out of your freshman class at the university.
I might have been weeded out, and quite frankly, if I had failed that class, I probably wouldn't have gone ahead. The fact that I was able to recover, all right, made me more resilient, and I realized I could survive, and that I had learned how to learn, and that I could, in fact, pursue this field, even making up the difference between the things that I didn't know. But having to catch up and keep up is
simultaneously.
It's tough, yes.
Well, one of the things you determined, this group of women that convened to talk about why you made it and why others hadn't, was you all read at an early age. You had a strong sense of self. You were aware of your ethnic status. You remembered encouragement from at least one person, whether it was a teacher or a friend or a family member. You were serious about education and disciplined, and you felt positive about being a woman.
Yes. I mean, if you have to. I mean, essentially, you have to own who you are. And if you don't, then it's going to be hard to overcome the obstacles that get put in your way. I mean, I read very early. I read when I was 4 years old. We didn't have public kindergarten, and my parents, despite not having much money, did carve out within their budget money to send us to private kindergarten. Well, it wasn't a lot of money, but it was
significant to them.
It was significant to them. And so I read at an early age. I loved learning, and I would play school when I was at home. And so in the summer, I would keep reading, and I would keep writing and trying to improve. And I skipped the first grade. I started in the second grade. And it was the kind of thing of, I was like a sponge. I was always trying to know more.
Now, when this group convened in 1975, describe what the situation was for minority women in the sciences and where we are today. How much progress have we made?
Well, we were 1/10% of the doctorates. I mean, it wasn't, I said to somebody, I says, in a way, I'm kind of afraid when you see that many people all together like that, if something were to happen to the building, we would wipe out a large percentage of the people who were present, the women of color who were in the sciences and engineering.
Was that a literal fear?
I mean, you think about it. You really do think about it, you know, the fact that the numbers are so few. And I think that begins to be kind of like, well, what drives you? You know, you find community, you find other people like you who went through the same kind of thing. And you know that, in fact, that there is a way, and that you have to really help to make a way for the people who come behind you.
You talked about just a part of a percentage of African American women or women, minority women who earn PhDs, and that's increased to 6% of something like 20,000 PhDs each year. So in that respect, there has been
in that respect we have we've made real progress. And if you think about the women who were there, I mean, they have made personal progress. It isn't just the overall numbers. Shirley Jackson, who was a part of that group, is now the president of Rensselaer. Okay, and you began to understand that they have emerged in important leadership roles, but there are still barriers that are in place. We are not seeing the women of color on the faculties of the major research institutions. We're not seeing them at the helm of a lot of the businesses or research institutes. And so that's still an issue.
Well, how important is the composition of the faculty, for example? And I ask that because you and others are fond of saying you can't be what you can't see.
Well, you can, but it's really hard. I mean, I had to become something I had never seen.
And originally you wanted to be a medical doctor.
That's right. And that was what I knew. And so the difficulty of embracing these fields is tough, whoever you are. And then on top of that, you're carrying along all of the kind of sociocultural issues of trying to go into a community that doesn't look like you. And I think that is what we are seeing with regard to a lot of young women of color who aren't seeing faculty around. I mean, I think that if you stop and listen to a lot of the students who have been part of the protest on campuses, they want to see lots of different changes, but one of the changes that they mention invariably is to see a faculty who looks more like them, and especially in the STEM fields. And I do think that it is more difficult when you are trying to go into these emergent fields with not a lot of models about what that looks like.
How different is what your daughters faced, one who graduated from MIT, one graduated from Duke, from your experience?
Well, I think that their experience was a little bit better in the sense that they were less isolated. I mean, in my case, I lived in a dorm of 400 women, 400 men. It was like the first co-ed dorm on the campus. And when I came as a freshman, there were 3 African-American women
in the entire university?
Entire building. No,
building,
in this particular dorm out of 400 people. And the next year, one had graduated and one hadn't done well, and so I was by myself. All right. One of the things I learned is I had to get over that. I had to take what the university had to offer, and I had to learn and gain from the experiences that were there. There were women from groups that I had never had an opportunity to interact with who were there.
For example?
In Birmingham, everything was black and white. And at the University of Washington, I had the opportunity to interact with women who were coming from cultures from Asia and the Pacific and other kinds of places. And so there was a lot of opportunity to learn how other people saw the world. And I needed to get over the other thing and embrace what I had and just move forward.
You know, speaking of how people see the world, you often talk about Margaret Mead. She did a study back in the 1950s, and she asked students to draw a scientist, and invariably they drew a scientist. He looked like Albert Einstein.
Right. I mean, the wild hair, the kind of crazy-looking, disheveled clothes, etc. Yes, he looked like Einstein. And I hate to tell you, but if you were to ask a similar group of students to do that now,
they would do the same thing.
The majority of them would do that. There are some who now have other images, but I think that the fact that the majority would probably still do that is a problem, because it means that we're not getting out there and showing the full range of people who choose to go into the sciences and engineering.
So there's this myth about who is and who should be a scientist,
right.
But there's also this thing called a stereotype threat.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the issue is that when you go into a setting, what is the expectation for your performance or your behavior or your choices? My husband tells a story about going into a class that was not in his major here at Penn State, but it was in an adjacent field. But the individual faculty member so did not expect to see an African-American male in his class. He kept saying, this is whatever it is, 400 and something. And my husband kept sitting there. And he finally
He was
asked
implying
him-
you should get up and leave. You're in the wrong
implying
class.
he should get up and leave. And I think that in many cases where you are expected to behave in a certain kind of way, or you're expected to not be successful because of race or gender or disability or something like this, that you work down to those expectations.
It's a self-fulfilling
Yes, it is.
prophecy.
Yes, it is.
It was interesting because in this, I think it was a Yale study where perfectly competent women
Right.
scientists, because of the stereotype threat, when they talked with male scientists,
Yes.
they sometimes sounded less competent
Right.
and perfectly competent when they talked with their female peers.
Right.
And it was because of this expectation.
Well, I mean, it's the expectation, you know, and it happens early. I mean, there's another study that talks about asking male students in a biology class who are the top students, the smartest students in the class, and asking female students the same thing. And the female students are just as likely to name males as females. Okay, and the male students are not likely
To name
the
females.
females. They name more males, even when the objective measures of performance indicate that shouldn't be the case. So it starts early and it kind of keeps going. And I do think that it's a hard thing to overcome.
Talk, if you would, a little bit about the subtle challenges, though, that women, minority women especially, face, and what the American Association for the Advancement of Science is doing to remove the barriers that you yourself experienced.
Well, I think that this whole thing of the bias issue is real. If you are going into a job interview, or you're going in, you're sending your resume in, there's research that talks about the fact that you send the same resume with a male name on it as you do with a female name on it, and the male is seen as having greater potential, offered more money. They're willing to mentor him, and that doesn't happen with the female. And the sad thing is that that is the case with both male and female reviewers. So
Wow.
somehow,
So women are as guilty of this
yes, somehow we
prejudice.
have so inculcated this into the way that we think about people and opportunities that we are, that we're as guilty. And we have a meeting coming up at the end of April where we're going to look at implicit bias, because that's what we're talking about, as it relates to publishing and as it relates to grants and funding. Because if, in fact, we are having different expectations for men and women, that's a problem, because we are not necessarily seeing what's there. We're seeing what we think.
And what we think, too, is that there is a math gene, for example, that you are
yes.
born with this ability to do math, instead of thinking, well, if I practice math the way I practice basketball, I can get good at this.
Well, there are fields of science where there is a stronger belief that you're either good at it or you're not. Mathematics is one of them. I mean, but we're not the only ones who are guilty. I think philosophy is probably as guilty as the math people. But if you believe that, you behave differently. You, in fact, think that there's nothing that you can do to basically get better. If you believe that it's related to effort, then you can work at it. You can engage with the material in ways that you can move forward.
Well, I'm kind of curious to know why you had this strong sense of self. You knew when you failed those first two quizzes in chemistry in your freshman year at the University of Washington, you knew you could do it. And it didn't matter what you got on those two quizzes. What was it? And where'd you get it?
I think that having come from a high school where I was the top student, that I had a sense that I could compete and that I could get the work done. And I had basically learned what had been put before me. So I didn't believe that I had suddenly become dumb. And I think that having this idea. You know, I said in a TEDx talk that I did that talent is developed and smart is something you become. You become smart. You put forth the effort, you work at it. And I think that we all have to carry that. Otherwise, you can be derailed by how other people see you.
How optimistic are you that we will reach proportional parity with women and women of color in the sciences?
Well, I am an optimistic person, and science, I think, is an optimistic field. As I said, we look at the possibilities and we keep working at it. I don't know that this will happen in my lifetime. I hope that we have put the things into place so that in my granddaughter's lifetime, that she does not encounter the same kinds of barriers and obstacles that I have, that her mother has, you know, that we will get to a point where we can get over the kinds of assumptions that we make about people.
And on that note, we're out of time. Shirley Malcom, thank you so much for talking with us.
You're very welcome, and thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Shirley Malcom. For more information from this interview, visit our website at conversations.psu.edu. I'm Patty Satalia. We hope you'll join us for our next Conversation from Penn State.
Production funding provided in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you. Thank you.